Coming up on Choppers Politics.
When Ian Blackford stands up, he does not speak for Scotland. When Nicola Sturgeon stands up, she does not speak for Scotland. We are very divided on this issue. That's clear from opinion polls over Scotland's future. But please do not think the SNP equals Scotland, because they absolutely do not.
Hello and welcome to Choppers Politics. I'm Christopher Hope, the Telegraph's chief political correspondent. My guest today is a former dairy farmer, a professional football referee, and the MP for Moray in Scotland since 2017. And for the past 12 days, he's been the MSP for the Highlands and Islands. He's also the leader of the Scottish Conservative Party, succeeding Ruth Davidson. Oh, and he's only 38 years old. Douglas Ross is in charge of a part of the Conservative Party that's got to work mighty hard to fight off the siren calls for Scottish independence. He's vehemently against it, but after parties who are for the idea won a majority in the recent Scottish parliamentary elections, he's got a massive fight on his hands. We sat down earlier to discuss just that. What he'd make of a tunnel between Scotland and Northern Ireland, and whether Douglas Ross fancies a quiet life by getting back to refereeing Old Firm derby matches. Douglas Ross, welcome to Choppers Politics. Great to have you on.
Great to be back. You spoke to me just after I became leader, so it's good after a few months to be back on your programme.
Now, we're reflecting on the Scottish election results. How did you think you did?
Well, we maintained our position as Scotland's main opposition party. We maintained our number of MSPs at 31, and we increased our vote by over 100,000. So many people felt in 2016, when we more than doubled our MSPs from 15 to 31, that was a flash in the pan. The Scottish Tories would never do that again. Throughout this campaign, we've been written off by the commentariat, the newspapers. They assumed Labour would overtake us into second place again. So to hold on to second place, 31 MSPs and increase our votes and vote share, I think is a success. And of course, I said throughout the campaign, I wanted to stop an SNP majority, to stop a second independence referendum, and we did that as well.
Was there a degree of tactical voting, do you think, which did hold up the union vote?
Absolutely. Not all over the country. Sadly, we lost one of our colleagues, John Scott, in Ayr by just 170 votes. But if you look at the most marginal constituency going into the election in Dumbarton with Jackie Baillie, the Labour MSP, she had a majority of 109. And at this election, our Conservative vote went down in that constituency, and Jackie was returned with a greater majority. If you look at Aberdeenshire West, which all the focus on the Saturday revolved around that count, we had a Conservative majority there of 900, and it ended up at over 3,000 with the Lib Dem vote falling significantly. So where there was a strong, credible challenger to the SNP, you could see pro-UK voters uniting behind that strongest candidate.
Did that happen organically, or did you encourage anybody to vote for the next best unionist party behind the SNP to get those numbers up?
Well, I made it very clear at the start of the campaign, particularly when Alex Salmond re-entered the fray with his party, where he looked to game the system in favour of pro-independence parties, that we as pro-UK parties should work together. Now, my offer to the Scottish Labour Party and Scottish Liberal Democrats was quickly turned down by them and their leadership. But I do think voters recognised there was an opportunity here in some constituencies, in some parts of Scotland, to make a difference by putting their own traditional voting intentions to one side to vote for the strongest candidate to stop the SNP.
They're able to make that view themselves without any kind of formal coupon deal with other unionist parties like Labour.
Yes, there was a number of newspaper campaigns where particular titles here in Scotland were very clear to their readership how they could support the union and how they could, in individual constituencies, vote for X party to stop the SNP, and that clearly had a positive impact as well.
What's next then, do you think? I mean, where we sit now, it appears to me you have bought 3 years maybe for the union to work for people in Scotland further than it does already. The SNP didn't get this clear majority it needs in Parliament to force, or to try and force the pace on a second independence referendum.
Well, let's just be clear. The union is working for people here in Scotland. That has been abundantly clear, not just during this pandemic, but for years, decades and centuries before that.
But that case needs to be made to those people, doesn't it?
Yeah, but I was going to say, particularly during the pandemic, people could see their jobs were protected because of the furlough scheme. Self-employed got support through the self-employed income support. And of course, we are seeing an easing of restrictions in almost every part of Scotland, apart from my own Moray area and Glasgow at the moment, because of the rollout of the UK vaccination scheme. But I agree, more does need to be done. But in terms of what's next in Scottish politics should be focusing on our recovery from this pandemic and rebuilding. And another opinion poll out yesterday showed that support for Scottish independence has fallen back further, and support for another independence referendum in the First Minister's time frame over the next couple of years, or indeed in this next Parliament, is lower than it has been before. So I think people see the priorities of this Parliament must be on protecting jobs, investing in the NHS, supporting education, all these issues that are absolutely crucial to people's daily lives.
When are you expecting the next Scottish independence referendum, Douglas Ross?
Well, I don't want another independence referendum.
That's not the same answer.
I know, but I went through the 2014 referendum, and I know Nicola, Sturgeon and supporters of nationalism will say it was a great experience. For many of us who were campaigning to remain part of the United Kingdom, it felt it was a very bitter experience, and it was a very tribal argument that didn't get to the crux of the key issues. And we still don't know what currency there would be in an independent Scotland, what it would mean for borders, what it would mean for people's pensions, etc. So while the SNP still are unable to answer these key questions, I think they're a long way off holding another independence referendum. And for the future of our country and investment and security, I think many people want that off the table during the course of this next Parliament.
The Tories did well, didn't they, in Scotland, despite the Minister for the Union, Boris Johnson. Is that right?
Well, the Minister for the Union, the Prime Minister, was in touch with me throughout the campaign. He didn't visit Scotland during the campaign, and I'd made that very clear. You know, I was the leader of the party on the ballot paper here in Scotland.
Did you say to him, don't come up here, it won't help me?
Well, what I said was, it's my team.
Just you and me talking.
Yeah, of course it is, always. You know, it's my team that were up for election here in Scotland. It was our manifesto, it was our campaign. The Prime Minister was extremely supportive of that. But he also knew, we were running the campaign here in Scotland as a Scottish Conservative and Unionist party.
Do you think the centre now gets the importance of the union? That's one of your election speech at the party conference last October made that point. It was saying if you can't just chuck money at Scotland and hope people thank London for it.
Yeah, we have to get rid of this devolve and forget attitude amongst ministers, members of the cabinet and civil servants. And I was very clear, this was not a criticism of the current cabinet, but both Conservative and Labour cabinets and administrations since devolution and the establishment of the Scottish Parliament in 1999. But I do feel there is far more attention paid to promoting the benefits of the Union here in Scotland and what Scotland provides to the rest of the United Kingdom, from the Prime Minister right throughout his cabinet and throughout the entire Conservative parliamentary group.
Part of that is from spending money, isn't it, on infrastructure, roads and bridges and rest, and then badging them with the Union Jack. Is that a good thing in Scotland?
Well, that is part of it. But of course, we've already discussed the furlough scheme and the vaccination scheme. These are very tangible examples of a positive outcome for Scotland as being part of the United Kingdom. I think, the fact that the SNP instructed their officials not to take part in the union connectivity review is actually puzzling to many people in Scotland. Why would you not want to see that investment in infrastructure and jobs coming to Scotland? And it seemed very petty that they just didn't want to get involved because it had the word union in the title and it meant working with rather than against the UK government. So I do think we need to see a change of approach from the Scottish government as well.
It is strange. I mean, in the sense that you can imagine politicians not wanting to engage with other politicians, but I think I'm right in saying that they actually told their civil servants in Edinburgh not to talk to Peter Hendy's team on that review. Is that right?
That's correct. Transport Scotland were told not to engage. The Transport and Infrastructure Minister, as we speak at the moment, although there'll be a reshuffle here in Scotland in the next couple of days, Michael Matheson instructed his officials not to even take part. What we did see, however, was Sir Peter Hendy, and the Prime Minister was quite right to say this, to go straight to local councils then, to engage engaged with local authorities across Scotland, and I know the feedback Sir Peter Hendy got from that was invaluable. So Scotland still had a voice in these discussions. It was just a shame that Scotland's government chose to absent itself from those discussions.
Well, one of the ideas in that connectivity review, and the final report is out, I think, in July, isn't it, or June or July. One of the ideas in there is a fixed link between Scotland and Northern Ireland, whether that be a tunnel or a bridge. What do you prefer?
Well, what is in the Sir Peter Hendy report is a feasibility study looking at that link. It's not suggesting what the link is, how it would be constructed, when it would be constructed, etc. So it is just looking at a very high-level overview into that possibility. But crucially for me, and I campaigned down across the border constituencies, and particularly in the southwest during the campaign, it's local infrastructure that should be and must be upgraded before we even think about this link between Scotland and Northern Ireland. And I think that will see the biggest impact for those communities, which are now, once again, all represented by Scottish Conservative MSPs. We've got to ensure investment comes from both the UK government and the Scottish government to these areas.
Are you being listened to in Whitehall at the moment? Of course, you were being listened to looking into the election period, but are you now having weekly meetings? There was a union committee of some sort developed within Number 10, which will be meeting regularly to discuss the union. Are you part of these conversations?
Yes, I am. I have discussions with the Prime Minister, obviously with the Scottish Secretary, Alistair Jack, a former guest of your podcast as well. I listened to his one. Alistair and I speak regularly. I spoke to the Prime Minister on the day of the final election results at length. I've been engaged with Michael Gove since the election as well. And yes, I feel there's very good input both within Whitehall from the various different departments that are involved in the union, and it goes across all government departments, and of course back here in Scotland with what we're doing as the parliamentary party here in Holyrood and as the main opposition to the SNP.
Do you think that this debate about Scottish independence will end up in the Supreme Court? That's what many are forecasting, isn't it? That what Nicola Sturgeon wants is a fight in a court. Even though she might lose it, it will just keep the excitement about independence bubbling amongst her supporters.
Well, Nicola Sturgeon absolutely wants that. And something I think was largely unseen after the election was how quickly Nicola Sturgeon pivoted to this argument about the UK government taking the Scottish government to court. And she did that to take away from the fact that she has now on 2 occasions failed to win an outright majority in the Scottish Parliament. It has been done before. The SNP have achieved an overall majority, and it was a disappointing result for the SNP because many pundits had assumed they would win a majority. And I think Nicola Sturgeon felt she had to distract from her election result by coming up with this argument about the UK government taking the Scottish government to court. But crucially as well, there are a number of issues you would have to get through before you reach that point. First of all, the Lord Advocate, who is appointed by the First Minister and is a member of her cabinet, also provides legal advice, and he will have to say any bill that she takes forward is within the competency of the Scottish Parliament. And of course, a referendum is not within the competency of the Scottish Parliament. And also you have the issue of the presiding officer will ultimately have to decide if they believe it's right for that bill to come forward. So Nicola Sturgeon has jumped about 3 paces to speak about a court battle, but she's not actually looked at the situation that she faces within her own government of actually getting that piece of legislation onto the floor of the Scottish Parliament.
You're still an MP, aren't you, as well as an MSP?
Correct.
How can you wear those 2 hats, and will you be letting one of them go? I assume the MP's job rather than the MSP's job.
Well, 3 of Scotland's First Ministers, 5 First Ministers, so more than half of our First Ministers since devolution have been both MP, MSP, party leader and First Minister of Scotland. So there is a clear precedent there that people can do both. I've said when I became leader in August last year that I would fulfil my duties as Member of Parliament for Moray for the remainder of this term. I don't accept a second salary for doing the MSP role. Indeed, I've already said I will be donating that to local charities. And I do actually think that Scotland has 2 governments, it has 2 parliaments, and to have an elected representative who can speak up for Scotland in both of Scotland's parliaments is actually a very positive thing.
How will you manage dealing with First Minister's questions? You'll be up in Edinburgh for that, clearly, won't you? And then you have to come down for Scottish questions in London. You'll be like an MEP back in the day, buzzing around between Brussels and Strasbourg. First
Minister's questions are traditionally on a Thursday, and you will know that Thursday is normally a one-line whip anyway in Westminster. So it will be a balance, it will be a juggle, but as I say, others have done it before.
And looking forward, what is the plan for the Scottish Conservatives? I remember long ago to remember the idea of renaming the party, the Unionist Party. Have you thought of that? Have you thought of any further way to differentiate yourselves from the English Tories? Because that might help you north of the border.
Well, I think what we have to do north of the border, and I made this clear in a speech I gave on the Sunday after the election results, is our campaign in 2016 and our campaign in 2021 was about stopping a second independence referendum. We have been successful in both of those campaigns in terms of stopping the SNP majority. But we can't go into the next election in 5 years' time simply being the no to IndyRef2 party. So I've said that hard work starts right now. I am building the team to be the strong opposition here in Holyrood over the next 5 years, but also to be seen as a government in waiting, because it would be absolutely wrong for the people of Scotland to face another choice in 5 years' time, after almost 2 decades of the SNP being in power, over whether the SNP will get a majority or not. There has to be a clear alternative. And the fact, as the Scottish Conservatives are the main opposition party now, have been for the last 5 years, it is our duty to show the people of Scotland we can be that credible alternative government to the SNP come the next election in 2026.
Is your problem that if you're always defining yourselves against the independence movement, then there'll always be, let's say 40% of support baked in for the SNP? Isn't that what Labour was seeing by the end of the campaign? They could see that, how do you, unless you bring the Lib Dems, the Labour and the Tories into one political force, you really can't overturn this baked-in majority that the SNP have.
Well, I don't know what Labour were seeing towards the end of the campaign, but obviously the result was their worst ever result at a Holyrood election, losing a further 2 seats. So they have lost seats at every single election since 1999. But what I think is very important, and this won't be easy, I'm not trying to suggest that all of a sudden, we will make a clear change and suddenly previous SNP supporters will start to vote Scottish Conservative. But people who are in the middle ground, who have supported the SNP because they thought they had good plans for government, or they thought Nicola Sturgeon was a credible person in the position of First Minister, will be looking in 2026 at then, almost 2 decades of SNP rule. And they will wonder, are they the best party to continue for another 5 years in terms of education? Will our standards still be falling? Will there still be the investment in the NHS that we need? Will there be a focus on our economy? Will they be protecting jobs? Or will they again be distracted by another independence referendum? So I want to ensure that people can see there is a clear alternative to the SNP. And while I say it's not easy, there are signs for optimism. Because if you look at the northeast of Scotland, for example, the Banffshire and Bucking Coast seat, going into the election, the SNP had a majority there of 23%. Their majority was 23%. It is now 2.3% because there was a huge swing away from the SNP to the Conservatives. And if we can start to build on that over the next 5 years, then I am really positive about our opportunity to be that strong alternative government.
What do you say to people in England, Douglas Ross, who just think if the Scots keep moaning about independence, clear off then?
Well, it's not the whole of Scotland. When Ian Blackford stands up, he does not speak for Scotland. When Nicola Sturgeon stands up, she does not speak for Scotland. We are very divided on this issue. That's clear from opinion polls over Scotland's future. But please do not think the SNP equals Scotland, because they absolutely do not.
And just finally, Douglas Ross, you've got several jobs now. Have you given up refereeing Old Firm games, or do you want a bit of peace and quiet?
Well, they've been a bit quieter this season because there's been no spectators in. But I think when the fans get back into the stadiums, there'll be a bit more atmosphere again. But I haven't, sadly, refereed a game for quite some time because of an injury, but I hope to get back to it at some point.
Well, Douglas Ross, thanks once again for joining us this week on Choppers Politics, and hopefully we'll talk soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that's all we have time for this week, listeners. Do follow us on Twitter. We're at Choppers Podcast. And you can email us, chopperspolitics@telegraph.co.uk. Or if you can, please do leave a review on Apple Podcasts. It really helps other people find this show. And I'll read out some of my favourites next week, so make sure they're creative. Thank you to my producers, Theodora Luludis and Elliot Lampitt. But most importantly of all, thank you to you for listening. And please do buy a copy of the Daily Telegraph if you can. You won't regret it. Until next time though, cheerio!